Welcome, everyone. I speak today with a tender and passionate heart on the topic of fierce compassion. I'm offering this talk in honor of the transition that the Deepening Practice program is going through. In January, we will be metamorphosizing into the Fierce Compassion Sangha, and you can learn more about this on my website as a global community of support for waking up together. So I want to begin by reminding us that remembering the already awakened state, remembering who we really are, is actually quite simple. But incorporating and integrating this remembrance into every moment of our lives, into every aspect of our being, aligning all of our actions with our heart's motivation, our heart's fire for consciousness, requires practice, requires refinement and love. Most importantly, it requires fierce compassion to do this work. In this day and age, we find ourselves facing global uncertainty, facing an unprecedented number of challenges as a species, ranging from climate change to systemic racial injustice and discrimination, to the residue of patriarchy and misogyny, the residue of colonialism, racial capitalism, and a severe distortion of separation from nature. Everything that I'm speaking of stems from the myth of separation, and it requires fierce compassion for us to wake up together from this myth and remember who we actually are, thus able to pour ourselves into life in a regenerative way through the embodied understanding of interconnection and we consciousness, as opposed to the illusion of separate self, me and my little bubble. Many of you listening to me talk today already have a known experience in yourself of the gift of cultivating fierce compassion through practice towards oneself, equally to for the entire world as self, allowing to dissolve the illusion of separation. And one of the basic foundations of compassion is that it is steadfast, unlimited, a boundless resource, all inclusive, non-judgmental, does not perceive through hierarchical lens, no one and nothing left out. And so in sitting meditation, very simply, and as a practice of alchemy, quite honestly, we sit and we remember spacious, non-dual awareness into which we get to welcome and allow to be welcomed every single part of our humanness. Welcoming ourselves where we are smooth and ourselves where we feel cracked. Welcoming our personal and collective trauma. So in this day and age, which can appear as a global crisis, I'll remind us that the Chinese symbol for crisis is danger and opportunity in the translation. The opportunity is to allow the fire in our hearts for waking up together, to be held and to be fueled into the transformation that is needed now, the healing of all that has been left unmetabolized and passed down generation upon generation, and now shows up as triggers in the relational field or traumas held in the cells of our body. From where they come, we might not know. All of this ancestral trauma that we carry. We have the tools, we have the heart, the strength of heart. We have the ability to welcome into our healing. This begins by replacing judgment with curiosity, being willing to step into the dark or unknown, which is also the place beyond judgment, of being, of awareness itself. And then it is through fierce compassion that we continually, step by step, allow for, we might say, life to heal itself, that we can participate in the self-healing of our world, the self-healing of our own traumas. Many of you listening know well that the relationship we get to cultivate with our human self through practice is one of great, great love, steadfast love. The difference for me before I came to practice versus some years into practice, the presence of a steadfast, compassionate companion or mentor at your side, the awareness that gets to sink deep into your bones, that there is no alone. The root of the word alone is all one, and that we get to feel ourselves and, in an embodied sense, know our belonging to this world, our belonging to ourselves, our belonging to one another. This is revolutionary, to be honest, in a world where the myth of separation has created a tear in the fabric of human relationship and a rip in the connection to the divine through one's own being. There's a tendency towards self-hatred, I would say, which is one of the symptoms of all of the isms that we face of the myth of separation. So compassion is our constant guide in practice. Compassion can be gentle and compassion can be fierce. And we need to have access to both the gentle and the fierce so that we can respond moment by moment to how to be of service to life now. And being in service to life includes this being. We include ourselves in the circle we live in service to. We don't overly include the self. This is not a practice of self-absorption, but actually the opposite, dissolving the self, remembering the freedom of no self. But we also do not abandon the self. We know that our capacity for compassion to others truly begins with the generosity of spirit we're willing to bring to this being. So close your eyes for a moment and just allow to come to mind anyone in your life, in your community, who has exemplified fierce compassion for you. Perhaps even allowing to come to mind a time or situation, a way in your life today that you are embodying and deepening in your fierce compassion. Acknowledging the courage, the tenacity, the stick-to-itiveness, the fortitude, the willingness to risk it, the willingness to trust something beyond the limiting stories of the conditioned mind. This courage is one of the main qualities of fierce compassion. When we begin to remember who we really are beyond the myth of separation, separate self, we begin to experience both a deeper sense of power through presence, just sitting in meditation and accessing the refuge of stillness, which is always here, which never leaves us, is a tremendous source of power. And whenever I speak of power, I'm always pointing to power with rather than power over. Okay, we've graduated from the old paradigm of domination, subordination. We also begin to access the entire world of nature, nature's intelligence, our own natural intelligence, our relational intelligence, as a tremendous source of power. The ability to give and receive love moment by moment is one way I would define shared power. And so when we're talking about fierce compassion, we can allow to come to mind and heart the image of Kali, the spirit of Pele, the Hawaiian volcanic fire spirit. We can allow to come to mind nature's might and to understand that we too are vessels of this nature's might if we allow ourselves to empty out of our limiting stories, our conditioned beliefs, this small identity that I might be holding on to because it's felt safe or familiar for a long time. And we do so on behalf of the greater good. This motivation, I might say, guides everything in our Dharma practice. Everything in our Dharma practice. Our heart's fire for personal and collective transformation. Wholeness is already here. Allow yourself to be aware right now of the already existing quiet backdrop of spacious, interconnected awareness in every moment. And yet, in this day and age, we are facing, I'm having some sadness come in my heart as I speak to this. We are facing generation upon generations of collective karma, which has included denial of the myth of separation and its impact, which has included denial of the impact of separation from nature, colonialism, racism, our fear of darkness, which is at the core of so much of our confusion, I believe. One of the most simple but profound stories of the Buddha is the moment the Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree, connected to his own fierce compassion, willing to sit for as long as it took to see clearly, to see beyond the onslaught of Mara, suffering, the conditioned voices, stories, dramas, human conditioned fears taunting him. And there was a moment when Mara got upset with the Buddha and said, "How is it that I cannot claim the power over you that I am trying to exert? How is it that you can maintain your peace and clear seeing in the face of what I am throwing in your face?" And the Buddha touched the earth and touched the ground. As Mara said, "By whose authority?" And the Buddha said, "By the authority of the earth, by the authority of the earth." So nature's might, allowing ourselves to be vessels for this. One of the reasons that fierce compassion is such an important energy right now is that, as I stated earlier, sometimes gentle compassion is what's required. We need to learn how to soften, rest in stillness, allow our hearts to open, and know the medicine of simply that. On a practical level, this can take the form of what happens when you are simply listening to another human with full attention, allowing them to be held in we consciousness, in stillness. This can be experienced when you are in sitting meditation, just resting in the spaciousness of awareness itself. In other words, no doing required, no action required. This can be the soft embrace or warm laugh that you offer a part of yourself you might have left out in the past, that you might have allowed to be left alone in story or trauma, and bring them back into wholeness. But at times, what is required is a different energy, compassionate action aligned with courage. And we're asked personally, even in the cultivation of our own practice, to strengthen this muscle, we might say, again and again. It takes tremendous courage to stick with it, the generous spirit of repetition with which practice works its magic. It takes tremendous courage to be willing to see clearly. There is a part of me I have left out, perhaps for decades, pushed away, abandoned. It's like seeing a child alone in a burning house. And now, even though part of me might be terrified, even though I have no evidence that there is a healing possible, I am going to reach in wholeheartedly, reach out a hand to this part that has been left in the shadows and save them. It takes fierce compassion to practice relational mindfulness. Many of you practice relational mindfulness with me. This is a fabulous practice for cultivating both gentle and fierce compassion. To practice transparency, really letting yourself become free in the relational field, to trust your heart to guide you and speaking your in the moment truth, speaking up on behalf of the whole, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it rocks the boat. We learn how to do so skillfully through fierce compassion. Looking at the state of our world right now, and many of you viewing this are activists and change agents in some form, you know the courage that it takes to do the work, to do the external work that is needed, as well as to do the work of staying fully present, allowing your heart to open, and quite honestly, to be broken again and again, to be broken open by what we witness and see in our world rather than turning away. So, two important components of fierce compassion are turning towards rather than away, again and again and again. And also developing and deepening our discomfort resiliency. There are so many uncomfortable conversations that need to be had now. There are so many conversations that could be invitations to learn how to love one another across lines, invitations to collaborate on solutions the world needs to find now. I consider this the realm of visionary activism, where we let ourselves be courageous enough to drop the stories, the limiting stories that we turn to instead of our creative resourcefulness in times of chaos or change, and to really let vision come through and show us the way. So, once again, sometimes compassion is gentle. And sometimes compassion is fierce. It is that no that we practice In setting boundaries with our own conditioned mind, I will not give my attention to these limiting stories, to the mind of separation. I am committed to reclaiming the authority of the heart. The heart's perception is so much greater, full of possibility, the pregnant possibility of every moment, and full of access to possibility beyond which our conditioned mind can imagine. It's also the no that is the sword which cuts through delusion. Manjushri Buddha. It is the no that sets fierce and kind boundaries when we need to set boundaries with others. How about folks when we need to set boundaries with technology? There's an onslaught to human consciousness right now beyond anything that's happened in history through artificial intelligence and the collective addiction, which is an act of absolute denial, to the screen. It takes fierce compassion to set conscious boundaries that help us to feed our connection with source, which is being threatened now, our knowledge of ourselves as source energy, the clear seeing, and peace, which is source energy, the vibrant aliveness and joy, which is source energy. It actually takes courage to really embody true joy. By the way, grief and joy are two sides of the same coin. So it takes courage to be willing to feel fully our feelings in a world that is so focused, I would say the dominant paradigm, on denial, on a turning towards, and the reason there's turning away. And there's a reason that there's a turning away. It's because there's a fundamental duality between light and dark that says, I'm trying to go after everything light and get to the light, which means trying to get away from everything dark. The only thing truly, we might say, dark in that definition is the misinformed duality itself, the judgment, the pushing away of something. Through fierce compassion and through presence, we understand and remember the alchemy of light and dark. We learn how to meet all of life with curiosity, present moment curiosity, and the clear seeing of the heart, the clear perception of the heart. Again, rather than the familiar, collectively agreed upon biases and unconscious stories of the conditioned mind. One of the reasons this topic enlivens me is simply that I'm crystal clear that in my own life and practice, the cultivation of fierce compassion is one of the greatest gifts I have received in this life. It's the gift of being willing to walk through the threshold of courage, because oftentimes, as you know, it requires facing what feels like fear. It requires stepping into the unknown, the mystery. It requires reaching down into a place where you can hear the calling forth of the still small voice within, beyond your very limited perceptions of self. And in the culture I grew up in, there's a real strong misunderstanding of kindness versus niceness. Many people are taught to be nice, appear nice, keep it nice, look nice. And this focus on niceness keeps us from actually being kind. In the name of being nice, we might absolutely diminish ourselves or our truth or authenticity. In the name of being nice, we might not speak up when we witness an injustice because we do not want to rock the boat. In the name of being nice and keeping things nice and pretty, we might mistaken our anger as a problem and try to repress it or judge it, rather than acknowledging the vital life force that comes through anger, considering that it might be reflection from our natural feedback system on behalf of all of life on planet Earth that is actually a sacred messenger to be turned towards and presenced and welcome in, meaning integrated that energy into us. So, this confusion between being nice and being kind, I absolutely see in spiritual practice, in contemporary Buddhism and mindfulness. I often see people trying to emulate the way they think a compassionate being would look instead of integrating compassionate being as a way of life into their own authenticity. Sometimes gentle compassion is what's required. Just notice right now if there's any part of you that as you turn within and rest in presence, wants to be simply welcomed a little bit more fully into the still embrace of being. Nothing to do but be here. Nowhere to get to. Nothing to strive for. And yet in another moment, that same heart of compassion might notice a part of you beginning to engage in an addictive habit pattern, a seductive thought that you know what path it leads you to, suffering, a limiting story that is taking you out of your body and up, up, up into disembodiment. And in those moments, sometimes it's required that we say, come back here. I am not letting you go down that path again. I love you too much. I'm going to remind you who you really are. And sometimes we need to offer that energy externally to one another. We certainly need to have access to that energy in service to the collective challenge and opportunity of this time. So again, I'm going to repeat that discomfort resiliency is a really important piece of fierce compassion. And we learn this so simply, even through sitting meditation. Staying present, not taking personally, allowing all of life to move through us, consciously allowing life to be as it is. And we learn this each time we take a risk and are willing to stay present through an uncomfortable situation or conversation. To stay present and bring presence to perhaps the topic of racial injustice and taking an inner look at it. Or the phenomenon of climate change and our collusion with it. Just the conversation of how does it feel to be a human being alive at this moment in time, and what are we willing and ready and ripe to let go of on behalf of the greater good, simply because it was never true and it's not true now. And so the more we exercise this muscle, the more we are reclaiming the authority of the heart, the shared heart, to be crystal clear, our natural intelligence, our already existing wisdom and care and benevolence. This goes hand in hand with the quality of stillness, not taking personally. So, as you're listening to my words, just pause and take in a deep breath. Just feeling the air as it enters your body, fills your body, and leaves your body. My hope today is to remind you that compassion is innate. It is who you really are, that you have tremendous access to fierce compassion, that this is part of our refinement and cultivation in practice. For those of you who want to go deeper in this topic, you're welcome to join me starting again in January. Tuesdays, twice a month for Global Sangha. You're welcome to join the Fierce Compassion Sangha and receive regular teachings and access to videos and direct support from me as guide. We also in this Sangha invite practice partners so that people can be deepening in relational mindfulness and inquiry together, because we are allowing all of life to be our laboratory for remembering who we really are, for remembering that we have the capacity to meet the changes ahead through our creative intelligence, our creative resourcefulness, we consciousness, collaboration, rather than resistance, story, fear. The changes we need to make, and this shift in consciousness that is much easier than we think, folks. I want to emphasize that. It's much easier than you think. But it also is going to take everything we've got. No need to be giving our attention, our life force, to the limiting stories that have haunted humanity or confused humanity for so long. We see the impact clearly within and out. So as you close your eyes once again, before I bring this talk to a close, just allow yourself to connect with a quality that you're reminded of in today's talk that you want to bring to the rest of your day. Whether that is courage, stillness, discomfort, resiliency, joy, vibrant aliveness, and equally allow to come to mind and heart an image for something that helps you to remember nature's might as a resource. The fire of the heart for awakening. Thank you so much for listening.